Faro here, and welcome back to another toy review, and we're still counting down to Halloween. Today we're going to be taking a look at another McFarlane figure again. We are looking at from the McFarlane's Monsters line, the McFarlane's Monsters Dracula. But before we can talk a little bit about this figure, let's talk a little bit about vampires first of all. In that, do you remember when vampires were in fact scary? When they were vicious, bloodthirsty creatures of the night that feasted on the blood of young women and had the ability to change into a bat, and when exposed to the sunlight, they would horribly burn up to the point where they would become a pile of ash, or would burn up when they came into contact with a crucifix. I say that because with works of fiction like Twilight, and when they came along, it seems that the whole idea of what vampires stand for have kind of really changed in recent years for worse reasons. And even though the original ideal of vampires is still there, it's not widely regarded as much nowadays. And I'm not going to spend this whole video just bad-mouthing Twilight. I'm just going to be talking about this figure, the McFarlane's Monsters Dracula. Like I said about the werewolf, this is a fantastic way of taking a well-known horror icon and doing something very different with it and making it much more different than how it's been, how it's appeared in a lot of different fiction and a lot of different movies and television and all that other stuff. And this, in a lot of ways, is how you do Dracula and how you make it look more frightening and more menacing. And the one thing that I really like about this figure as well is that even though it looks like Dracula, even though it technically is Dracula, it looks much more frightening and much more animalistic than how Dracula has appeared over the years. And since this is a McFarlane figure, you already know where this is going, and that I'm going to be spending the whole review saying how great this figure is, and the detail and everything about this figure is above and beyond perfect. We can pretty much start a drinking game on everything that I say regarding these figures, so take your pick. But anyway, yes, back onto the figure itself. There are a lot of different things that I will say that I really, really like about this figure, in terms of the sculpting mostly, because the sculpting is where it's quite busy in a lot of different ways. Let's look at the face first of all. The one thing that I really like about this figure more than anything is how much of a bat, how much more animalistic this figure, how much more animalistic this version of Dracula really is, and that if you look at the face, you can see right away that it has a sort of bat aesthetic to it, right down to the nose, and that the nose definitely has a sort of, it's definitely a bat nose, and of course it has the pointy ears right there. That's something that you don't often see Dracula normally have. And right away, the one thing that I will say which is very good, which is a nice touch, is the blood pouring out of Dracula's mouth on the teeth, right up down to the chin, which is quite nice. It's a nice little feature. And the rest of the figure, of course, is covered from head to toe with a lot of different good paintwork, in that you can see some blood spatter on the chest, on the legs, on the hands, especially on here, on the thumb and the index finger right there, and of course on the shoulder as well, just a little bit of it. But all over, this figure is just fantastic. The paintwork on this is tremendously well handled. And the one thing as well that I like as well is that even though this is a much more different version of Dracula, it's incredibly more gruesome as well than how Dracula normally looks. In that all over the figure you'll see that he's covered in chains, which are quite nice. And of course on these chains you will see that he of course has hooks attached to it, which of course have a lot of dead bats, so that is really, really cool. You can almost imagine that Dracula almost takes one of these bats and starts eating them, but then again, we wouldn't really imagine why Dracula would feast upon his own kind, but whatever. But the hooks are a nice touch and are very, very gruesome and just look really cool. The rest of the figure, of course, has a few minor little things, in that it has about 11 joints of articulation, in that it has articulation in the neck, which can move quite loosely a little bit, and of course that stops because of the hair, and the hair is just this dirty grey colour, which again is nothing really special, but the hair is very well textured and very well detailed. And of course the joints on this arm right here, and of course right here as well, and on this wrist. The legs as well, and the waist can rotate as well, and the toes can move as well, so that's pretty good. So this figure is quite loaded with a lot of different articulations, so he is quite posable, but really not meant for playing with. And the one thing as well that I like as well about this figure is that even though he has a very animalistic look to him, you can see right away that it has more of the bat aesthetic to it. In fact, it reminds me a lot of how Dracula looked in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, when you saw him in his bat form, his giant bat form. This is very reminiscent of that. I really like that a lot. Again, really nice paintwork. The detail on this is astonishingly well put together. The hooks are a nice touch, Everything about this is really nice. Oh, also the chains as well. The hooks and chains are a nice touch. Accessories-wise, there isn't really a lot that this figure comes with, except that it comes with, of course, a couple of rats. I'm not sure if you can see them or not, but here are a couple of rats that you can actually give him. In fact, let's see. One of them, in fact, is a bat, which of course is frozen in instant vigor mortis, so you can actually have that hanging from one of the hooks on the arm right about here. Let me just try and get him on. There we go. And these three holes at the back, these three holes are actually where the rats will go, because one thing that I like about this figure as well is that it makes the figure much more creepy to have these rats just crawling over Dracula's body. And the one thing as well is that each of these rats have little pegs. I'm not sure if you can see them or not. You can peg these rats onto Dracula's back so that he, of course, has rats crawling over his body. Let me just try and get a few on just to get what I'm trying to get at here. It's hard enough to get these things on, and trying not to break them is hard enough, but it manages to get the job done, I think. There we go. So you can only get 3 rats on his back, but again, it's a very, very nice touch. It looks amazing. The rats really don't do very much on this figure, they're pretty much just there to make the figure a bit more creepy, but it's a really nice touch to have these rats just crawling over Dracula's body. And also as well, you can actually have this rat, which looks like it's just been chewed, and you can see the blood right there. You can see that Dracula's been chewing at it quite maniacally, fit into his hand right here, and of course have Dracula just munch on that quite a lot. So that is such a nice touch. I really like that. And one other thing as well is you can take these rats off and just have them just resting at his feet. And of course, what would Dracula be without his cloak? Because that's the one thing that makes this character stand out. And the cloak, which funnily enough is, hang on, I'm just trying to get this guy to stand up. Come on. There we go. I'm just going to lay him down for a bit. Okay, the cloak is in fact this really nice rubbery textured. They're in fact his wings. What I really like as well is that all over this cloak, these are his wings, and it looks like they're stitched up. So whenever he was trying to fly, whenever he would change into his bat form, of course, the wings would constantly fall apart, and he'd have to stitch them back up every single time. And it just looks incredible, and of course it adds the nice little Dracula touch by having the chain right up to about there, so that's pretty good. Not sure if you can see it carefully or not, but if you can see on the ends right there, nice little detailing on the chains, which is quite nice. But this is a well-detailed cape, and it just looks fantastic. And the cape, of course, is removable, so you can actually have this removed on and off on a different occasion, but let's just get this guy with his cape so that he looks more complete. There we go. Now he looks fantastic. So here is Dracula with his cape, and he looks much better. Much ready now to sink his teeth into a lot of different prey that he comes across. And I just love how well handled this looks. So let's just get all the rats together. There we go. Oh, yeah, there you go. Falls down constantly. The problem with this figure is that even though it has got flexible toes, the balance on this figure is quite off. So you're going to have a lot of time trying to get this figure to stand up. There we go. Stay. That's it. So here is Dracula, and he just looks fantastic, all complete with his chains all over his body, his cape attached to him, and he just looks really, really badass. So, final thoughts on this figure. This is a fantastic representation of how you take Dracula, a very well-known horror icon, and make him into a much more animalistic, very brutal-looking, just a vicious monster, and make him not as goofy or not as I wouldn't say weak, but just not as threatening as the Bela Lugosi vampire that everyone knows and loves. This is very reminiscent of the Gary Oldman Dracula from Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. This is very reminiscent of that, and it looks remarkable. The paintwork on this is fantastic. The detail is well put together. Everything about this figure is really, really good. So, if you're a fan of vampires, not counting Twilight, I would recommend this figure highly. This is a fantastic idea of taking Dracula and making him look more vicious and more just more evil, and that's one thing that I think everyone really needs to see in Dracula at least once or twice. So anyway, this has been the McFarlane's Monsters Dracula, and I'm Sculpting 140. Still counting down to Halloween, everybody. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you all soon. Take care.